Welcome back to another Explainer. Today, we're putting on our tactical hats and stepping right into the boots of a medieval military strategist. We're going to break down one of the most astonishing logistical and engineering feats of the Middle Ages, the grand strategy of the First Crusade and the 1099 Siege of Jerusalem. So, grab your notepads, because the sheer scale of the strategy we're looking at today is absolutely staggering.
Okay, let's dive into this. To understand the starting conditions, we have to look at the catalyst, which was profoundly ideological. Back in 1095, a single sermon in France ignites a religious fervor that just sweeps rapidly across Europe. From a purely strategic standpoint, this is our casus belli. We are objectively looking at a massive mobilization fueled entirely by the intense religious motivations of the actors involved. They weren't just looking to annex some neighboring territory, right? They deeply believed they were marching to reclaim the spiritual heart of the world. And honestly, that immense psychological drive is really the only way to explain the unbelievable momentum of the military mobilization that followed.
To understand exactly how this 1099 siege went down, we've structured today's briefing into 4 distinct phases. First up, the march to the Levant. Second, logistics and imminent starvation. Third, 11th century siege engines. And finally, the tactical breach.
All right, let's kick things off with Phase 1. The march to the Levant, which meant marching thousands of miles to the Holy City.
So the campaign officially sparks in 1095, but these forces don't actually arrive at the gates of Jerusalem until the year 1099. I want you to put yourself in the shoes of a theater commander for a second. You are tasked with moving an army across the entire length of Europe and then all the way through the Levant over 4 grueling years. This wasn't some quick jump across a border. No, this was a massive, multi-year continental deployment. When you zoom out and look at the strategy from a high level, you have to account for brutal terrain and the immense physical toll of literally walking across continents in heavy medieval armor. The geographical scope is frankly an absolute logistical nightmare. I mean, just supplying an army on the move for that long requires thousands of wagons and non-combatants. In fact, just keeping the pack animals alive required an astronomical tonnage of food and forage every single day. Every mile they marched drained their resources, which made reaching their final destination not just a strategic goal, but a physical and psychological necessity.
Which brings us to Phase 2, logistics and imminent starvation. We're looking at a truly desperate strategic crisis.
And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate strategic paradox of the whole campaign. On one hand, you have the imposing, seemingly impenetrable stone walls designed specifically to withstand long, drawn-out blockades. And then, contrasted against that, you have the grim reality of the attacking force, crusaders standing literally on the absolute cusp of starvation. When they finally arrived at their target, they weren't exactly met with a well-stocked supply depot. They were met with a ticking clock. As a strategist, this is your absolute worst-case scenario. You desperately need time to break down heavy fortifications, right? But time is the one resource you have completely run out of. Your troops are out of water, they have no foraging supplies left, and they're stuck in an arid landscape right outside those imposing walls.
That extreme deprivation created a complete pressure cooker environment, leading to a final, desperate cataclysm. The imminent starvation didn't just weaken the army, it actually acted as a brutal and immediate catalyst. It forced the high command into a rapid, do-or-die assault. They simply couldn't afford traditional slow siege tactics where you just wait the enemy out. There was no time. They had to channel their remaining strength into one massive, cataclysmic push to capture the city, or they were going to completely perish in the desert.
Moving on to Phase 3, 11th century siege engines, where we'll look at building sophisticated weapons of war.
Now, what's really interesting about this is that an 11th century siege engine wasn't just some simple ladder or a handheld battering ram. We are talking about massive, incredibly sophisticated mobile towers. As military strategists, we really have to recognize these large wooden siege towers as the absolute apex military technology of their age. Think about the logistics here. To build them in a totally timber-starved desert, commanders actually ordered their own fleets to be dismantled. They used the ship's timbers and even employed Genoese sailors as combat engineers to construct these towering structures. And to protect them from the defenders' deadly Greek fire, they covered the entire outside in raw, wet animal hides. This incredible ingenuity set a totally new benchmark, proving once and for all that modular, prefabricated siege engines could overcome static defenses. It's a tactic that profoundly influenced military engineering and later medieval warfare developments for centuries to come.
But having the plans wasn't enough. The execution had to be flawless. It was a literal race against death,
broken down into 3 distinct steps. First, mitigating starvation just enough to keep the men working and fighting for one final push. Second, actually constructing these sophisticated weapons of war out of scavenged materials. And finally, step 3, executing the cataclysmic assault. It was a rapid, phased tactical deployment. Every single swing of the hammer during construction was done under the very shadow of those imposing walls, with everyone knowing that if the large wooden siege towers weren't finished in time, the entire 4-year campaign would simply end in starvation.
And that brings us to the climax, Phase 4, the tactical breach. Let's trace the assault on Jerusalem's walls. I want you to imagine looking down at the battlefield from above. First, the attackers split their focus to target multiple vulnerable sectors of the city's perimeter, which brilliantly forced the defenders to spread their own forces thin. Then came the crucial deployment. These multi-ton wooden towers are painstakingly rolled right up to the walls under a relentless hail of defensive fire, using massive log rollers. Just think about the immense physical exertion required here. You have hundreds of starving men using sheer willpower to push multi-ton structures across uneven, rocky terrain. Once in position, the towers acted as mobile high ground. By deploying these siege engines at specific coordinated weak points, the attackers could literally step over the impenetrable defenses and successfully overcome the fortifications of the Holy City. The tactical breach was officially achieved.
All of this leaves us with one ultimate lingering question. How does an army on the cusp of starvation summon the logistical willpower to engineer a desperate, cataclysmic victory thousands of miles from home? The 1099 siege of Jerusalem wasn't just a clash of swords, you know? It was a triumph of extreme military engineering and sheer, desperate human endurance. The staggering scale of the logistics, combined with the sophisticated engineering tactics used to construct those siege towers under such immense pressure, remains one of the most fascinating case studies for absolutely any military strategist today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Until next time, keep analyzing the tactics, keep questioning the logistics, and keep learning.